Okay, we're live now.
Has anybody actually used one?
You know what, we have one too in our area, but I don't think it's ever taken off.
Okay. So I just want to get a sense before we get started, what would be of most benefit to you? Would you like to hear stories of communities using complementary currencies, what they've been able to do, rather than getting into some of the more technical stuff like the effects of interest on communities? Or would you like, or will we just wing it and see how we go and see what you feel? Feedback, guys, you've had coffee, come on.
A combination.
A combination?
A few
Yes.
examples.
Yeah, okay. This lady at the back.
Maybe a big overview, a little bit of the history, and then where we are today generally.
Okay.
And then we can dive into some detail.
Okay, I'll give you some time.
Yeah, I need some real ideas about.
Real ideas, okay. Real ideas. Okay. Susan.
If you can bring us up to date, or even just tell the story as much as you know about Tanzania.
Tanzania?
Tanzania,
Oh,
the little town that just tried to do
I don't know about Tanzania, no, but maybe you can tell the story of Tanzania. That would be fabulous. I don't.
And then a comparison to Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Ooh, I have a rant on Bitcoin. You'll get my Saturday morning rant. This gentleman in the striped shirt.
I was there yesterday to hear your panel discussion, but I had a question. I wanted to know these local currencies, how do they jive with if the community is having a trade or buying things outside of them?
Okay, we can deal with that. We can definitely do that. And if I don't address it, please remind me. Yeah. Good morning. Hi.
I was wondering about, I followed a little bit about transition initiative, and that's the only acquaintance I have with it, but I've never heard of any being used here in the United States for that concept.
Good morning, come on in. Okay, are we ready to get started? Okay. Good morning, everybody. I really appreciate seeing you on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock after a wild night in Madison, Wisconsin, where the beer flows. I want to start with a story that I find so completely compelling. I don't have any slides for it, so I'm just going to talk extemporaneously, and then we can get into the material of the day. But about 15 years ago, there in Brazil, in the area of Fortaleza, which is in the northeast, sorry, dyslexic, the northeast of the country, there were two communities, poor communities, that lived by the seaside. And the government decided that they wanted to actually move these people so that the land could be made available for multinationals to come in, like large hotels and developers to come in. So lo and behold, the two small towns, all the people were herded into this place, middle of freaking nowhere. And all there were literally palm trees. And there were some very rudimentary buildings made out of, come on in. Can we close the door because there's some noise from the hallway? Come on in. Sit up in the front. You're late.
I'm late. I just got thrown out of my other meeting.
Oh, we got in trouble today. Okay, we got in trouble. Good morning. We're starting with the story of Fortaleza, Brazil. So there were these two communities living on the seafront. The government decided they wanted to move these guys so to allow big corporations to come in, build hotels, condos, the scene on lovely seaside resorts. So these people crash landed in the middle of nowhere. There were some very rudimentary buildings made, which were made out of cinder block. Very, very basic. There were basically no roads, no freaking anything. But there was a meeting hall, and they got together one evening, and somebody stood up and said, "Why are we poor?" And there was sort of silence in the room for a moment, And they started thinking, well, we all make money, but why don't we make it a plan of ours to come back next week when we have actually totted up the incomes that we all earn and see how much money we actually earn. So they came back the next week and they worked out, I think, between them all, they made something like $650,000. They have reals there, but in equivalency in dollars. And they said, okay, that mightn't be much for a village like ours, but it's money. What is going on? Why are we poor? And they realized the reason why they were poor or considered themselves poor was because that money was actually leaving their village. And they said, we've got to do something about it. Come on in. Thank you. Come on, right up in the front, latecomers. Shame. Shame.
We're not going to be on camera.
Oh yes, Alison, Michelle, come on, you're another 15 minutes of fame for you, Alison. Good morning. Good morning. Okay.
Good morning.
Thank you for making it. Morning.
Good, sorry.
So, thank you. So, they realized that all the money was actually leaving their town, and they said, what are we going to do about it? And they realized that they wanted to actually set up a local currency that would actually stay in their town. So they started something called Banco Palmas, which literally means the bank of palm trees, because that's all there was in their town. And they started trading among themselves. And what was really interesting about Banco Palmas is they formed this local bank, and they gave two types of loans. One, for example, was called a social loan. Like, for example, I needed the equivalent of $50 in order to get through the week or through the month so I could feed my children. And they would go to, the lending officer would go to Alison, because Alison knows me, and say, Alison, what do you know about Jackie Dunn? And they said, yeah, she's a good woman, she's dependable, I've known her for 5-6 years. She is dependable, and I think you'll get your loan back. I hoped Alison would say that. And
I wouldn't dare not.
And as a result of Alison's endorsement of my social capital within the community, I would get that loan that would make the difference between me being able to feed my children or to pay a utility bill, whatever it was. Then other types of loans, if I wanted, for example, to get a sewing machine or a computer, something that would actually set up a business, there'd be slightly more rigorous, formal, assessment. But generally, the idea was to incentivize commerce. But I would actually get those loans in palms. So, lo and behold, all kinds of activities started taking place, to where they created over 2,000 jobs in this community that had nothing in a matter of months. And over time, with this success, the Central Bank of Brazil said, what's going on here? So they brought a lawsuit against the founder of Banco Palmas, a guy called Joaquim de Seguro, and accused him of printing money fraudulently. So this went all the way up to the Supreme Court of Brazil. And if you can imagine the last day of the proceedings where the judge is sitting, and you've got the Central Bank of Brazil, and you've got this small, community bank that was basically founded by an ex-seminary priest, sitting there wondering what their fate was going to be. So the judge turned to the Central Bank of Brazil and said, gentlemen, what have you done for the poor? And with that, there was complete and utter silence. And the judge ruled in favor of Banco Palmas. This happened about 14, 15 years ago. And today, the government of Brazil totally supports dual currency banks. And when we talk about dual currency banks, we're talking about a bank. You can have a bank account not only in the national currency of the country, but also in the local community currency. And they have endorsed these institutionalization of about 200 dual currency banks throughout Brazil. And to this date, my last conversation of last week I had with Banco Palmas, they have 101 banks operational right through Brazil. And each community has their own currency, so that they have a different name. In some situations, you can pay your tax, part of your taxes in it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. What we can see from the Banco Palmas example is that governments, whether on a federal level, on a local level, are actually seeing that complementary currencies can work, and they can resolve problems that the conventional currency does not cover. So let me get into some particulars so you can actually understand. How many people can tell me the difference between barter and a complementary currency?
Well, isn't barter goods for goods?
Exactly. So this is a very fundamental mistake or miscomprehension that people make, is that complementary currencies are barter. They're not. Barter is, I will come over and I will cut the grass outside your home if you give me half a dozen eggs. Now, trust me, you will not want to make that deal with me because I'm a hopeless gardener. So we will not be able to make that exchange. That's why we need money. So I can do something for you, earn some money, and then pay you for your half dozen eggs. So money is a medium of exchange to facilitate trade. So barter is not always possible, as in the case I've just given you, and money is used because it facilitates the transaction. When we talk about money, most people's eyes glaze over because I think it's been made very, very complicated. It is shrouded in a language that is very, very difficult to decode. And also within ourselves, it's sort of hardwired into our psyches of being something of shame. Shame because we don't have enough, our personal worth is defined by how much money we make. And even if you're in the uber rich, there is, I wouldn't say shame, but there is a lack of a sense of trust to talk about it. Because if you know I'm a very, very wealthy person, I wonder why you are being nice to me. You know, what do you want? So the whole thing of money is not only a very complicated, made very complicated, it's even more, made even more complicated by the alleged science of economics, and also we have the emotional thing. So for most people, I'm talking that. You know, it's horrid, it's complicated, and what I'm going to try here to do today is actually to simplify all that and bring it down. So what is money? In the economic textbooks, they talk about it as being a unit of account. That means you can keep track of things, a medium of exchange so we can actually do business together, and a store of value, something we save, so we can have something for our rainy day or our retirement. As we covered in yesterday's discussion, money is not a thing. It lies in the space of an agreement. It's an agreement like we agree to marry somebody, to live with somebody, to join a political party. It is an agreement. So we agree, for example, to exchange in a certain currency, or we don't agree to a deal. You don't have to accept my money if you don't want to. So we come to an agreement about using a certain currency. And as an understanding that money resides in the space of an agreement, different agreements are possible. Now, how many people, none of you said that you actually use a complementary currency. Oh, you do? Oh, some people who came in later.
No, I just realized I do.
Oh, you do, okay. So what complementary currencies do is, if you see that big river as the flow of transactions in the conventional economy, there's an awful lot of unused resources and unmet needs that are not addressed by the conventional economy. And what complementary currencies do is actually provide a bridge between these unused resources and unmet needs. So a commercial application is something that you actually, all of you, I would suggest to you probably use them to get here to Madison, and that's frequent flyer miles. This started off as a gimmick, as a marketing gimmick about 40 years ago by American Airlines in order to incentivize people to be loyal to that particular area. And what they had was, the unused resource was airline empty seats, and the unmet needs was the need to actually get people loyal and using their particular line of services. So they created frequent flyer miles. So this, many years later, 40 years later, I think there are about 12 different airline alliances. Today you can use your frequent flyer miles not only to buy your next ticket to Cancun or your next business meeting, you can actually get hotel nights, you can rent cars, you can do all kinds of things. What the example of frequent flyer miles tell us, it's a very mild commercial application. It's not going to revolutionize the world. But what it has shown us, and what is very, very interesting, is that it is possible to process billions and billions of frequent flyer miles accurately and cheaply as a result of computers. You don't need acres and acres of accountants adding it all up. It would never work. It's because we have access to cheap computing and great abilities to process large amounts that actually makes it possible to run such a program as frequent flyer miles successfully. Now, what is interesting, if we can actually take that model and look at its application for social purpose complementary currencies. And as you can see here, there are roughly about, I stopped counting, but there's roughly about 6,000 today of different social purpose complementary currencies. I'm making a distinction between social purpose, which means something around for the community, as opposed to a business complementary currency, which we can discuss. The really great movers and shakers in this domain is not the United States. The United States is way behind everybody else in the world. But countries like Brazil are doing extraordinary things, and you've heard from Michael Palmas, that's just one example. But also Japan is doing something, a number of very interesting things. The UK and other parts of Europe, such as Germany. This is the story. Were all of you here last night for the who did not see the Curitiba one? Would you like me to tell you? Can everybody stand here in the Curitiba one again?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So this is the town of Curitiba, Brazil, which is in the south of the country. And about 25 years ago, the mayor of the town at the time, Jaime Lerner, had a huge problem. A lot of people had actually come into the town from the surrounding area in order to find work and go for the better life in the city. And a number of favelas, shanty towns, had grown up in the periphery. And there was a huge problem that they did not have the money in the coffers, in the municipal coffers, to actually take care of the garbage problem. So, where this particular arboretum exists, long ago there was this rubbish dump. To give you an idea of how utterly disgusting the rubbish situation was, as you can imagine, not only were there rats, there was all kinds of diseases, and obviously it was not a very, very healthy place to live. So what he did have is, he realized that he actually had no conventional money, but what he did have was a very good bus service that was running around Curitiba half empty. So the design of the bus service in Curitiba is everybody puts in a little token, and then when the bus lines up, there's about 8 doors that open up simultaneously, and everybody gets in, rather than we do here in the United States. Not that I know every city in the United States, where everybody gets on one at a time and puts in their money, blah, blah, blah. So this way, it's very, very efficient. People get on and off. They've done their transaction before they get on the bus. Get on and off very, 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 very simply. So what he decided to do was, as people just getting off the bus, is he decided that for every bag of garbage that was sorted out between, say, glass, paper, and, say, tins, for example, he would give that person, or that person would be given a token to ride on the bus service. So lo and behold, in a matter of weeks, and I'm talking weeks, the favelas were picked clean of all garbage. And what had happened was there was a number of large bins in different color codes, so people could actually deposit their sorted out garbage into the various vats. And they got these tokens. So they started riding the buses, going downtown and getting work and whatever else they needed to do. Then the local farmers of the area started accepting in the local farmers market partial payment or payment for their fruits and vegetables using these tokens. And here in this particular example, you can see leche que no leche, which means garbage that is not garbage in Portuguese. And here is a basket or a box of staples that go to a family each month if their kids are good enough to have a good attendance at school. This incentivizes kids to stay at school. So they get like oil and salt and sugar, staples that a family would need. And then, this is my, I always love this photograph. In days when the fishermen go out into the bay, and the fish are not biting, they actually can trawl for garbage. And they can actually bring the garbage in, and for that particular catch, they can receive tokens for their day's work. What is interesting, that what Jaime Lerner did, as we saw in the first slide, what happened with the frequent flyer miles, is he took an unused resource and an unmet need. And his need in this case was to clean up the favelas, and then get people working in order to clean up. He designed another 4 or 5 different complementary currencies, things related to planning permission. If a big company was coming into Curitiba and wanted to build to a certain height, they could build to a certain height, and if they wanted to go further, they actually had to create parks like this. So this beautiful park, and it's I think one of about 12 within the town of Curitiba, was built with local money. By simply rethinking money, rethinking out of the box, they were able to create this. I want to go into another story, which is about a very difficult neighborhood in Ghent, in Flanders, which is in Belgium, which is in northwest Europe. They had a very marginalized neighborhood, mostly made of immigrants. There were about 20 different languages spoken in this neighborhood. There was a lot of social housing that was enormously run down, and a lot of illegals, a very tense, unhappy neighborhood. And they did a survey, the local government did a survey to find out what these immigrants wanted. And they said, we come from the countryside, we're now living in a city, we would absolutely love to have a little garden. They said, okay, let's think about this. So they found an abandoned factory, which was razed to the ground. And you can see here is the ground of the floor of the factory. And what they did is they set up little gardens, say about 10 feet by 5 feet, and these can be rented from the city. And the only way you can actually pay for the rent, you can't do it in euros, the national currency, you can only do it in turcas. And turcas is the emblem of Ghent, which is little towers. Let me see. So, these are, it's a paper currency. They did not want an electronic currency because they were afraid or concerned about surveillance. And they took pictures from different types of, different areas of the town. You can see some of the social etc. So they then asked, well, okay, this is very exciting, but how do we actually earn these turcas? And there's a variety of things they can do. They can take their light bulbs and make them energy efficient. They can go into the neighborhood and clean up graffiti. They can beautify their neighborhood by putting a box of flowers on their windowsill facing out into the street. So basically they would have a tariff of many, many different types of activities and the requisite payment they would get for their time. So here we see, people cleaning up the neighborhood, planting flowers, beautifying it. What is very, very interesting is that as a result of having this complementary currency, the town of Ghent, the city of Ghent, which is probably one of the most oldest cities in Europe, has more volunteers than they could possibly use. And this project was so successful that other neighborhoods, wealthy neighborhoods in Ghent, really wanted to get their own complementary currency going. They have a small budget in euros. I think it's about 50,000 euros. But because of the circulation effect of the Ghent, of the Turcas, they are getting 3 times in the first year the circulation of that money, and they expect in this year that that budget will have rotated around the neighborhood 20 times. So you can see the leveraging effect that the complementary currency has. We're going to, sorry, you have a question.
Are any of the analysts, economists adding these into their gross national product or their
They're planning?
Yes. Or their analysis as to what the economic activity
Yes,
is?
there is some analysis on the benefits of that, and I'd like to address that a little bit further down. I'll just go down, but remind me of that question. Healthcare is a huge bugaboo. I mean, how many people are concerned about healthcare in this country? Okay, yeah. What's very, very interesting is this is an analysis of the cost of healthcare and patient satisfaction. What I find is so interesting is the USA has the highest healthcare and the lowest satisfaction. Ireland and UK are in the middle somewhere, but not a happy bunch whatsoever. And there are some preliminary conversations going on in Europe at the time, because Europe that has a social mandate with its people to provide healthcare can't afford it. And what they're finding is that an awful lot of the diseases and illnesses that we have are actually lifestyle diseases. So for example, depending on your weight, you have increased possibilities of diabetes, cancer, stroke, pneumonia, Alzheimer's. And the issue of weight is something that we can control by exercise and better choices in our food. So what was then designed? What was designed is, let me see. What was designed is what we call a wellness token, where it's in the initial discussion phases at the moment, whereby looking at, say, a youth population at school, for example, and if they make certain choices in terms of better food choices or greater activities, and obviously we get people working in groups, they would get something called a wellness token. And these wellness tokens can be turned in for the kind of stuff that kids like, such as football jerseys, money to download, podcasts and things like that. All the electronic stuff. So this is a way. This is really thinking outside the box, and it will be run by a wellness foundation. And the idea is to get young people really incentivized to take care of their own health, and then get their parents and the older generations involved. And so as a result of having a healthier population incentivized by a token, a reward, that this will bring down the health costs in certain currencies, in certain countries. One of the initial countries that, I'm not going into the machinations of it all, but one country that is interested, and there's been no official policy made, is actually Ireland. And the idea, they've already started with 50% of the school-going children in that country to get them out, instead of constantly sitting at their computers and dealing with social media, actually out. And they're actually playing Irish croquet, which is quite a very, very robust game altogether. Yeah. So on the issue of health, Japan has really been looking at the issue of healthcare. And one of the things that they came across was that their aging population was probably one of the fastest aging populations in the developed world. And they were wondering how they were going to take care of their elderly without going bankrupt. And what was designed about 20 years ago was something called thei, which means literally carrying friendship tickets. And how it works is that I go down the road or next door in my apartment building to the little old lady that lives there, and I find out what she needs in order to be comfortable where she's living, where she feels safe. So it might be me driving her to a doctor's appointment, a dentist appointment, helping her write a letter, for example, bringing her out shopping. And for every hour that I spend helping her out in whatever way she wants to be helped out, I get a thei in my thei account, which is an electronic credit. What's interesting about these credits is that I can save these up for a time when I'm older and need help, or I can transfer them to another part of Japan where somebody can come in and look after my own mother or my own father. And the response of the elderly Japanese people has been one of total embracement, because not only are they able to stay in their own homes for longer, they don't have to be institutionalized and sent off to a nursing home. They can actually remain in their homes. But also what's also happening is that they're building up friendships with another generation. That's one of the problems with our Western society, is that we're tremendously siloed in our particular milieu of our age group. Here, younger kids are coming in and having discussions and chats, and the people are feeling less lonely, but also gaining something of the wisdom of the elderly people. Now, of course, if somebody needs dialysis or they break their leg or something like that, of course they go to hospital. But for the day-to-day runnings of their lives, they have somebody they can call and can get some help. In Japan, there are now 478 systems operational right through all the various islands of Japan with international clearinghouses. A similar version of a currency backed by time is time banking here in the United States. This was founded by Edgar Kahn in the mid-1980s. Edgar Kahn is a lawyer who lives in Washington, D.C. And he actually had a heart attack and was feeling very low and felt rather useless. And he decided there must be a way for people to feel of benefit, to be part of their community, that they can give something of themselves. And he devised time banking. And rather like the thei account, the backing for the unit of account is time. So today, there are over 400 time banks throughout the United States. Here in Madison, I think that's one of the most energetic forms of time banking, with Stephanie Burek running it, who's a powerhouse and wonderful. And so a number of activities can be done using time. For example, here in Madison, to the best of my knowledge, I know it's still going on, working with the local utility for power, people are trained to make assessments of people's homes to see how efficient they are in using their electricity, or if the windows need to be replaced or whatever, need more installation. So they go and make these energy assessments of their home, and they are paid in time dollars for their time. And clearly people can go and get other services using these particular time dollars. This is so incredibly popular that it is operational, I think, in 32 different countries around the world. And they are growing here in America by 1 or 2 new time banks each week. One of the other very popular times of use of time banking is in New York. In the 5 boroughs of New York, they have a visiting nursing service, which is kind of like the Kiko example, where they get paid in time dollars. They have other systems where visit people new to the neighborhood. Maybe they're immigrants, they need to learn English. They are giving services like teaching English, and people get paid in time banking. I think in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon, there is legal services that is part of free legal aid, but they have a system of paying it forward. So if I get free legal aid from that particular branch, I am encouraged to go into my community and earn time dollars by doing good things in my community and then paying it forward. What the beauty of this is, if I give you charity, if I come up to you and say, I'm going to give you 30 bucks, what I'm saying is, in some way, I am better than you. You have nothing to give me. And with this complementary currencies, everybody is brilliant. Everybody has something to give. However, in the conventional economy, some people's work does not exist. For example, if you look at GDP, GDP is actually assesses what it takes within a nation state, in their economy, to go to war. That is the criterion used. So, for example, stuff that never appears in GDP is men and women who stay home to raise children, men and women who stay to take care of their elderly parents or an elderly relative. Any kind of volunteerism does not show up in GDP at all. Scary. So what complementary currencies do is say it gives a way for people to integrate back in society. There was a very interesting story of Homer Park, which is basically a bedroom community in the Washington, D.C. area. And this guy, whose name I'm forgetting in a moment, said, oh my gosh, it'd be a great idea to set up a complementary currency in our neighborhood because nobody really knows each other. So he sent out these flyers all around the community and suggesting that they were going to create this Tacoma Park currency. Got absolutely no response whatsoever. So he went door by door, knocking on the door and saying, hey, I'm thinking of setting up a complementary currency. And the person said, what's that? And they explained what it was. Said, but I have nothing to give. I have nothing to give. And then it was in conversation that people realized, yes, you've got something to give. You're an expert knitter, for example. I would love to learn how to crochet. You might speak a language, for example. I want to learn Urdu, and you can actually teach me that. Or maybe there's guitar lessons, or woodcraft, or whatever else. We all have genius. We all have a spark of something incredible to give. And if we can connect people with other people, there is a possibility of actually doing a transaction and actually benefiting that society. So anyway, so he went around knocking on all these doors, and people said, oh yeah, I can do that. Yes, I can, yeah, I've got something to give. And so it was in this conversation that people realized that they actually had something to give. So lo and behold, one of the big problems in Tacoma Park was that obviously there was a park, and there was rampant drug dealing. And one thing that everybody was really concerned about was how we're going to deal with the drug problem. We want our kids to play in the park, but we're really scared. So it was set up that an adult, during the daytime, some adult in the neighborhood would actually sit, they could read a book, they could knit, they could do whatever they wanted to do, but kept an eye on the kids. There are other jobs that need to be done in the neighborhood. Lo and behold, over a 2-year period, there was all kinds of transactions going on in the neighborhood. People really got to know each other. And over time, it became de rigueur that I did not need to get your currency to pay me to do things. I just knew that this lady here wanted me to come over and cook a meal for her family because that's the one night she had to work late. We started filling in for each other as neighbors. So it was just a great way for the community to get to know each other, and to where I believe today, if you are a new person coming into that neighborhood, you're invited to get involved in the local currency. And once you get sort of really acclimatized in that neighborhood, you then don't have to use the currency at all. But it's a great way of getting people to know each other and looking after each other's needs. I touched on this very, very briefly, but this is a commercial application of a currency, and it's called the weir, W-I-R, or weir. And in the mid-30s, in Switzerland, there were a group of 17 businessmen that used to get together on a regular basis, just to, have a few beers and talk about how business was going. This one day, they all got together and they all had their heads in their hands. Each and every one of them had received a notice from their bank that their line of credit had either been completely cut or dramatically curtailed. And saying, oh my God, how are we going to make it through to the end of the month? How are we going to pay our employees? How are we going to pay, our creditors? So they realized that within their circle, that they were actually going to individual banks to borrow from the banks in order to pay each other. And they said, aha, we trade with one another, so why don't we create our own currency within our own circle? And so they created something called the weir, which means we, us, and they started using these credits between themselves, paying each other, and also paying their employees or whatever. How it works is you can trade among yourselves. This was a cooperative, and at the end of the year, whatever transactions you have done in weir, you pay your taxes on that to the state in Swiss francs. So one weir equals a Swiss franc. You cannot turn weir into Swiss francs. You can turn Swiss francs into weir. You can't go back. And basically, it's an accounting system that actually keeps the whole economy going in Switzerland. Economists, this gentleman asked me, have economists looked at, how complementary currencies work and how they balance out our health and economy. I must tell you that while these stories are enormously inspiring, I find them very, very inspiring. We're in the very, very early days, like in aviation. We're like the stage at the Wright brothers. It's a miracle that some of these things fly. Some of them are really, really scary. But they do. And they will be perfected where we'll have, 777 or 787, hopefully with none of those mechanical problems. No, we will have, really a supersonic flight with these. The interesting thing about the weir bank is that 80 years later, 16% of small and medium-sized businesses in Switzerland use the weir. So when the traditional banks are not lending, but I can't get a line of credit, I go look through the directory and see who I can trade with using the weir. Economists have looked at the Swiss economy and say the reason why Switzerland has such a robust economy has nothing to do with their great Protestant work ethic, some magical ingredient in their glacial water, the fact that they were neutral in the Second World War. Is actually due to the fact that there is an alternate to the Swiss franc in a downturn economy to use another form of currency. So, and as you can imagine, way back in the 30s, the banks were not very happy to see this, but there was a massive PR campaign against them, but they lost. And this is like a regular bank, with a regular credit card. I think there are about 4 or 5 different branches of this bank right through the various cantons of Switzerland, and is enormously, enormously successful. We're actually designing other currencies at the moment that takes the idea of the weir. Oh, I also need to point out that this is a cooperative. This is not something hierarchical. Everybody in the weir is a member. And the reason why it is so, they incentivize people is it is such a strong economic force in people's lives that, if they do not adhere to the rules and regulations and the guidelines of the weir, you know, they get a warning and at some stage they can get kicked out. So they're, you know, they're heavily incentivized to play by the rules and not cheat and not do anything that would go against the bylaws of the organization. And this is the whole idea of, you know, peer pressure, I suppose, because, you know, to actually lose the advantages of being belong to this co-op is something that business people take enormously seriously. There are other designs we're looking at that are very, very early stages, but, you know, how do we get entrepreneurs funded? And the idea of there are some incubated ideas on how to get currencies into various segments of the business community so they can get funded and get their great ideas off the ground. But the idea of a cooperative with a complementary currency that works in tandem with the state currency is a very clear way to get things financed and has been enormously successful. I made a point in our discussion last night that the dollar or the euro or whatever national currency we own is actually worthless. I mean, it's a fiat currency, you all understand fiat. It's created out of nothing, there's nothing backing it. And what is really interesting, that what gives the national currencies their desirability is the fact that you've got to pay your taxes to the government on April 1st, or the 15th of April here in the United States. And that makes us go out into the community and compete with one another in order to get those dollars. And how money is created is through debt. For example, this lady goes in to apply for a housing loan, and they look at her credit history and decide that she's good for it, which means that she can compete within the community and bring home to the bank the interest on that loan. What is interesting is the money for her loan is created out of bits and bytes out of a computer. You know, so it's basically a paper transaction. What is never created is this lady's interest, the interest that she will have to bring back to the bank over a 15-year period or 30-year period, depending on the agreement with your bank. Which means that somebody within our whole collective is going to have to go bankrupt, because the interest on those loans are never, ever, ever created. So, in fact, you know, the shame around bankruptcy and the trauma around bankruptcy is something that I feel is enormously unjust, because the system is rigged. There cannot be enough money in the system to give everybody what they need, because then the money would lose its value. So we go out and we compete with one another to bring back the interest on those loans. And people, you know, fail and unfortunately commit suicide or end up, you know, in very, very dire straits. So with complementary currencies, it can be created in sufficiency so that nobody has to do without. Like in the Bank of Palmas example, you can get loans that are friendly loans. In the weir example, you know, you can get loans to start your business. You can, you know, take care of your of what you need to do by simply having an accounting of debits and credits. So I sell this lady something, I get a credit, she gets a debit. She's got to make sure that she's at zero, so she goes and sells to you. So it's just basically accounting of credit and debits, which you've got to net out at zero. So as a result of the designs, these currencies are cooperative. Then the idea is that a community gets together and they discuss what their unused resources are and their unmet needs, and design a currency specifically to address those. So there's all kinds of possibilities. This is one of my favorites. It's a project in Lithuania And the Prime Minister, who happens to be a woman of Lithuania, came to the decision that she wanted her country to be a learning country, a country that is continually learning, no matter what age you are, and that the older people, like myself, those over 40 or 50, who are hopeless with the internet and social media, that they could actually get to speed. And that there would be something called intergenerational learning. Again, going back to the problem of people in different age brackets being siloed. So they had a couple of advantages in Lithuania. They have the highest penetration of fiber optic broadband in Europe, and everybody has at least one cell phone. So they actually had the electronic infrastructure to start doing some interesting stuff. So what happens is that everybody who wants to participate has a dream. It may be a dream to go to Tibet and study Buddhism. It may be to come to Wisconsin to study cheese making, whatever it might be. But everybody has a dream of something they would like to do. Their bucket list, I think you call it. So they go and they make an agreement with the non-profit, which is a learning foundation. They build up a contract, I suppose. And I say, I will teach Gaelic for 1,000 hours, and in return for that, I get this trip to go to Tibet, where I've always wanted to go and spend some time. And so they say, yeah, we can do that. So my account is actually my phone number, and then there are various non-profits, which is very, very interesting. In this complementary universe, the non-profit has the role that corporations have in our competitive universe. So non-profits are enormously empowered because not only do they make sure that the system is running, an awful lot of non-profits, for example, have a learning quotient to everything they're doing, and they need volunteers. So this is a way for not only education to be paid for, but also the volunteer labor that is necessary. So anyway, I go off and I teach Gaelic for 1,000 hours, and then I come back and I've proven that I have actually fulfilled my contract, and they then set up the frequent flyer miles for me to get to Tibet, and whatever else I need in terms of being able to fulfill my 2-3 months vacation in Tibet. What they also do, this currency called the doras, is they get young people, say from the ages of 12 up to 18, to actually teach older folks how to use the internet. And both the person who is teaching and the person that is learning actually earns doras. And again, we have this intergenerational bond, which is really, really heartwarming. And I think this is my favorite application of the doras. They get kids from 6 to 7 years of age up onto 12, and their job is to go into their community and find an elderly person. And they ask this elderly person one very, very provocative question. What have you learnt in your life that you think that will help me? And with that, this amazing conversation opens up, which the young person can either record and videotape, they can do an interpretive dance, they can write an essay, and depending on the sophistication of their presentation, they earn extra doras. Again, we're seeing the elderly being honored for the wisdom they have in their society.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Then who would pay for the trip to Tibet?
Well, basically, there would be frequent flyer miles that would be donated. So they'd use that as a complementary currency, or there might be donations of things.
What about the cash needed
The cash needed?
to be in Tibet?
I think there's donations made for the cash, but but a great portion of it is actually done through complementary currencies. And this is something that we should remember, that a number of transactions can be blended. Again, we're dealing with the issue of agreement. I am not obliged to take your complementary currency. Nothing obliging me to do. But if we have a complementary currency, there is the possibility of opening up other possibilities of commerce. For example, we might actually arrange what I call a blended transaction. This is my living room, and I need it painted. So you, for example, might say, yeah, I'm interested in painting your house. So we would do a blended transaction where the paints and the brushes would all be paid for in US dollars, because that's stuff that has to be imported from other places. But the time that Reza is spending could be paid for in a time currency. But that transaction probably could never have happened because I would not have had the full amount in US dollars to pay you for your time and for the materials needed to do the job. So it opens up greater possibilities. And the genius of people to be able to put their minds together and come up with a solution is really amazing once you have another currency to fall back on.
Jackie,
Yes?
I just wanted to make a comment. This is extraordinary, getting younger people and older people together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we keep complaining about history repeat itself, and there are a number of studies being done. It's because of the culture disconnect from their past.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so the things that older people know, they can't have a way, a medium of communicating to the younger people.
Absolutely.
And they become disconnect, and they make the same mistake over and over again
Yes.
because of this disconnect.
Yeah. I think there was something lovely that Rebecca said last night on the panel, saying that America is now in the winter, and we've gone through like 3 or 4 winters in our collective history. And if we could actually hold the wisdom so we'd actually know not to repeat the same kind of mistakes again, it would be utterly wonderful. I also mentioned in our conversation last night that money is a public utility, and I like to think of it as a public utility, like bus service or, you know, water and light. And there's a number of areas where complementary currencies fail miserably. There are some successes and there have been failures. And then there's nothing wrong with failure. Failure is the opportunity to learn. And one of the things that happens, and I mentioned it last night very, very briefly, that somebody wakes up one morning and says, my gosh, our community could really, really use a complementary currency. And they're doing this push model. They sort of design this in the ethers and then try to incentivize people to join. What I always say is it's important that the community come together and you have a real world problem, a real world issue, whether it's education, elderly care, how to get to incentivize people to shop locally, whatever it is, whatever the issue is, you come together and it's more of a push model, a pull model rather than a push model. One thing that communities don't feel like talking about is they're sort of caught up in the euphoria of, gee whiz, we're going to issue our own currency. They don't line up correctly how they actually deal with discontent when things go wrong. And it's very, very important that you actually have a very, very clearly worked out way of dealing with grievances. So, and I think a lot of you have studied nonviolent communication. There's a number of modalities out there, but these need to be embedded in your bylaws. So when there is a problem, there's a very, very clear way of dealing with it. There's going to be interpersonal stuff. I mean, these things are messy. The great thing about conventional money is it's very non-personal and it's very, very efficient. These are very personal as a result of that, cannot be, they're sometimes not that efficient. And what we came across was the Nobel Prize winner, Eleanor Ostrom, in How to Manage Comments. And I think if we look at these 7 issues, to have clearly defined boundaries of your currency, be congruent with local conditions, and most importantly, to be hyper-democratic. What does hyper-democracy mean? Is that everybody is involved. And I think one of the most beautiful examples I find of hyper-democracy democracy is actually the island of Bali. And do you ever wonder why Bali has all these fantastic festivals? Have you ever, who's been to Bali here? Yeah. Weren't you amazed by all these incredible street festivals they have, these religious festivals that went on for days and days? How do they pay for it? I mean, it's a poor country. They have a time currency that's been in existence since 1800 AD. And basically, sometimes you hear the bell ringing in the neighborhood, and that is the call for the people to come together in that particular neighborhood and to do public works. And the sign of you being a good person and having really respect of your peers is the number of people who come to your funeral. And basically they earn this sort of street cred or island credibility, I suppose, is by their involvement in their currency, which is a time-based currency. In the issue of hyper-democracy here, at any time when they get together, they talk about what needs to be done. Maybe there's a bridge that needs fixing, a road that needs fixing, somebody's roofs needs fixing, whatever needs to happen. But at any time, the leader of that group can be ousted out for whatever reason. So it's it's a very interesting form of hyper-democracy. But everybody gets involved. It's slow, it's tedious, but it is totally transparent. Monitoring is also important. The issue of conflict resolution is also important. We talk about gradation of sanctions. You might, if you break the rules of the complementary currency, whatever they are, you might get a warning, might be a second and last warning, and then you're thrown out, or something like that. But it's for the community to work it out. And also, you've also got to make sure that you're congruent with state and federal law. Which then brings me to the question, are complementary currencies legal? What do you think?
Yes.
Why do you think they're legal?
Because you pay taxes and everything else in their currency, right?
Well,
Because they're not illegal.
they're not, yeah, you're not sitting around asking for permission. Interestingly enough, time banking in the United States has received 3 rulings from the Internal Revenue Service to say that they are tax exempt. So all activities done in time banking is tax exempt. And the reason why they have gotten a tax exempt status is because they're doing the social purpose of what they're doing. So it says it's ridiculous for us to collect taxes because then we're going to spend it on social programs. So this sort of bypasses the whole thing. So anything done in time banking is tax exempt. However, if you've got other currencies, they are subject to taxation. And one thing I want to make very, very clear, complementary currencies are not a tax dodge. Far from it. And if you're thinking of setting up a complementary currency, you need to talk with the appropriate tax people and get a ruling. What I also want to harp back on what we discussed yesterday, what gives the US dollar its desirability is because we have to pay taxes on the 15th of April every year. What communities actually realize that a lot of our towns and cities are actually, their coffers are totally bare or near bare. And if they accepted partial payment of taxes in that local currency, they would have money to pay partially or in part their own employees. And it's a way of keeping the wheel of the economy going. So I would really strongly urge, and I've spoken to some mayors and some city councillors, etc., by accepting partial payment or full payment in a complementary currency, not only would make the currency more desirable, they have a medium of exchange to pay for things on a local level. And it's interesting. There are 2 currencies in England. One is called the Brixton pound and there's the Bristol pound,
Yes.
which is a local currency. And I believe it's in Bristol that the mayor of Bristol is taking 100% of his salary in Bristol pounds.
Yes.
And I mean, that's the kind of guy who walks his talk. We like that. So,
Yes.
yes.
I was just wondering, how does the public bank,
been talked about fit into this?
Well, it doesn't, and let me explain why. I'm not an expert in public banking, but public bank is about being a state bank. It's about taking the assets of that state and banking them in this for the state. It's not about commercial. It's not a commercial bank that you and I would have deposits and have an ATM. So it's a way of taking the assets of the state and keeping it for the public, so they don't have to take commercial loans and things like that. So we will look at different types of banking, like Banco Palmas, for example. We'd form different banks ourselves in order to facilitate not only the local currency but also the national currency. And I'm very interested in talking, to credit unions, for example. Credit unions are dying on the vine. 200 disappear every single year. They're not considered sexy. It's people in their late 50s and older that use credit unions. The younger generation are not hip to it at all. And I'm thinking, if a local community could have a currency, could have accounts where you could have it in dollars and also the local currency, I think that would all give them a whole new lease of life. So,
Small credit unions are disappearing, but not the total state.
oh yeah, but I'm saying, but the
They're being absorbed.
yeah, they're getting absorbed, but 200 are disappearing every single year. Yeah. Alison,
Are we in the Q&A?
I will take questions.
No, if you want to finish, go
I
ahead.
think I'm almost there, actually.
And then I've got a big one for
You
you.
got a big one.
A big one,
I think we saw this last time.
Challenge.
We are kind of challenged at the moment, whether you're, from up above, looking at it from down up, left or right. And one of the most incredible things I want you to recall in this thing, I talk to people. I remember there was one particular interview I did in Washington with a very august magazine, and during the lunch, the interviewer was looking at what my colleague Bernard Leotard and myself, trying to work out whether we were pinko leftists or whether we were Hayekians, absolutely the extreme end of the right wing. And I tell you, it is neither. It is neither left nor right. This is about moving forward. And that's a very important thing. You can imbue a currency with the values that you hold by understanding the design functionality. And we can get into that if you want to. But you have an opportunity to get beyond this tired dialectic. Oh, this is right wing, oh, this is left wing. You have the power to mobilize your community, and community can be your village, can be your neighborhood, can be your state, can be the world. Whatever you describe as your community, you can think your way and reach agreement out of, and move out of this tired trouble. I tell you, sometimes I sit in front of the television and I cry. I really do. I get so frustrated. I mean, I look at Greece, I look at my own country, Ireland, and the rise of fascism again, looking at different populations as other, and I'm saying we're living the 30s again. Haven't we freaking learned something here? And when you understand that money is merely an agreement, and if we come to an agreement, we can use other forms of money so we can get our transactions. There is no reason why a child in this country, 1 in 6 children in this country go to bed hungry. Look at all the food there is. I mean, every one of you is passionate about your area of expertise. Passionate, and I really admire you for all the great work that you're doing. But until and unless we actually bring this thing called money, this agreement into consciousness, understand it, imbue it, really get it into our own DNA, can we take it back from the monopoly? We can take it back from this incredible, chitter-chatter up here in the ethers and bring it down to the ground, to where we are working, where we stand for social justice, where we stand for no to be marginalized. And you have the capability of doing it. You going out with your communities, you can do it. Yes?
I've been an elected local official for over 20 years, as well as teaching some of this stuff in community college, and I can guarantee that the conservatives can fit into this, as well as the liberals.
Have fed into it?
They can buy into it.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
There is the element of all their arguments that are part of this, and I'm interested in getting into a fray with it now, and to get into the discussion, because this is something that
This is not a very aesthetically beautiful petition.
well, my knowledge is not very good.
But you can learn, that's one of the great things. It's actually published by The Economist, which is not some French left-wing socialist rag, you know. We're in trouble, boys and girls, and you have an opportunity to seize the future and create it for what you want. We're totally run out of these traditional solutions are completely running on empty. This whole idea that we've got to have austerity has not worked, and unfortunately, you know, the remnants of the 1930s, I was not alive, and either many people in this room, but I think we all understood what happened as a result of this. There's a shift in values, and I will just touch on this very, very briefly. If you want to know if you live in a patriarchal society, you look at how God or divinity is portrayed. And if it's a man with a beard, with no girlfriend, you are in a patriarchal society. And it's very interesting over time in very strong patriarchal societies. We're talking about Sumer, we're talking about Greece, we're talking about Rome, we're talking about our society now. The image of the divine has always been this guy. There have been societies, very, very briefly, that are matrifocal. There's never been a matriarchal society, it's never existed, but a matrifocal societies have existed. And one of the most interesting ones happened to be in Northern Europe from the 10th to the 13th centuries. And during that time, it's very interesting, women had a much stronger place in society. There was the guilds, and women could actually belong to guilds. There were adoration of the feminine aspect of God, which is Mary. And we also had it in Egypt. Well, that's Egypt with Isis, and then she had the pharaoh on her lap. And further on in the Central Middle Ages in Europe, we had the Black Madonna, again with Jesus, the Messiah, on her lap. But the dominant power was actually honoring what was feminine. And what's interesting in these matrifocal societies is not only the place of reverence and greater equality for women, it was the time they also had local currencies. So there is a link between the divine feminine, the honoring of the feminine, and that's the feminine in men too as well, you know, we honor it in every one of us. There was also a proliferation of other currencies. For 2,000 years, they had not only gold for external trade, they actually had local currencies that were actually shards of pottery. One of the things I want to get financed is actually the archaeological digs to actually explain how these shards or staka were actually used as currency. And those currencies were actually used to build great pyramids that still exist today. Also, in Central Europe, the great cathedrals that were built in France and in Northern Europe were not dedicated to Jesus, they were actually dedicated to Mary. So you have Notre Dame, for example, and these beautiful cathedrals exist today. And these were not built by the church, these were public works. These were public works paid for by the people. In Notre Dame, for example, obviously they had mass, you could hear on Sunday, but during the week you'd get your teeth fixed, the doctor, cows were selling, I mean they're big marketplaces. But these were built by the people because they had surplus money, because of the availability of local currencies to actually give adoration to their creator. And these still exist today. And they were able, because of these currencies, because of how they were designed, they were able to think long term. And I don't know if we have time to go into it today, but if you can actually break down how interest works, we can see that it breaks down social capital. It makes planning for the future basically impossible. It perpetuates the booms and busts of the business cycle. So these currencies, way back then and today, they don't usually carry interest of any kind, so they're interest-free. Or additionally, they may have something what we call a negative interest rate, which is called demurrage. And what that means is like a parking ticket, for a parking fee for using the currency. So I issue a currency here to Susan, and she earns the currency within the community. But there's a timestamp on the community, on that currency, which means by a certain date you will have had to have spent it. Now, if she doesn't spend it by the date, there's a fee placed on it, so it loses some of its value. The purpose of having a negative interest rate in a currency, and again, this is part of an agreement, you don't have to do it this way, is that you are designing a currency to be a perfect medium of exchange. It is solely designed to be placed into transactions. It's not for savings. You save in something else, you save in dollars, you save in gold, you save in bitcoins, whatever you want to do. You use this purely to get the economy running. So it's the last day, it's the end of August, and my currency is either about to expire or I'm going to lose 25% of it. Guess what? I'm going out to town. I'm bringing all you out for drinks. Getting my haircut. We're going to the cinema. We spend it because it's going to be worth less tomorrow. So that's what a negative interest rate does. So anyway, that will give you a sense from a greater societal perspective on where this sort of fits into terms of our consciousness. I think I will take some questions, but in closing, I think it's worth really looking at money because we live in this fragile little dot in the armpit of the Milky Way. And we're really in the backwater, boys and girls. And I don't know what we need in terms of a sledgehammer for us to get it, but I feel it is worth working for not only saving this very fragile planet, but also saving our societies for their diverseness and their brilliance and their genius. And we cannot save the planet, nor can we save ourselves until and unless we rethink money. Thank you. I'm glad to take questions. The gentleman in the striped shirt.
There are two things. One, and this is referring to actually two British authors. One was Hazel Henderson in the United States, and who said all economists are brain dead, partly because they did not include the externalities of the environment. And, so I'm wondering how money can be fit into that because we only have one planet and we have more and more people that have to use it. How can this be included in our money system? And number two is the authors
May I take your questions in order, please?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will come up with the second question. What we're looking at is, we touched it very briefly last night in our conversation together, is that the current system is a monoculture. It's the same type of money, whether you're dealing in euros, British pounds, yen, whatever it is, they're all the same type of money. They're all interest-bearing, they're all hierarchical, they are all fiat-based, meaning there's nothing backing them whatsoever. What we're talking about here is we're not talking about supplanting them, we're talking about working in tandem with them. That's why we call them complementary with the E. They complement the national system. And what we're saying is we need an ecology of money So what that means is we have neighborhoods with different currencies, towns with different currencies, up to the state level with the currency, and we may actually have a supranational currency, a currency for international trade that is no government's own currency. The reference currency for the world at the moment is still the US dollar. And, obviously the geopolitical will and desires of the US transcend anything, to transcend whatever other, what am I trying to say? It transcends whatever the necessities of the world in general. Obviously the policies of the US transcend that because they have the global reference currency. But to have a currency that is actually designed for business, to facilitate business, that is no government's own currency would be very, very interesting. So what we will have is an ecology of currencies, and what will enable that is, say, mobile telephony, for example, where you can have a digital wallet that can carry a number of different currencies. So you might belong to several different community currencies. You might have an educational currency, an elderly care currency. You might have a B2B currency. So you can actually choose what currency you want to use for whatever transaction. So, so how does that help the planet? By having other currencies that do not bear interest, it will go a long way in the sustainability of our world. We cannot have a ecological sustainability without having a monetary system that is sustainable. And as we saw from the slide last night, according to the IMF itself, there have been 425 systematic crashes in the system in 40 years between 1970 and 2010. So what happens when a currency goes bust or there is a problem? People slash forests, people burn forests, and people make short-term decisions that totally obfuscates the need of planet Earth in order for some quick fix or some quick financial gain. By having currencies with a different type of architecture, which we can probably do at another time and talk about, is it incentivizes different behaviors. They become cooperative, they are good for the earth, and this whole slash and burn mentality that comes as a result of carrying a positive interest rate is no longer there. So by having this ecology of money, we can take care of our planet. Alison. Oh, sorry, this guy has another question, sorry.
The second thing is that, and you may probably have heard of this too, the Spirit Level was written by two British researchers. Pardon?
Epidemiologists. Oh.
And they found that countries that are more unequal have many more social problems.
Yeah.
So there are great social costs in relationship to this. And part of this is due to the great amount of money that is gained through investment capital, because and most of this is owned by the very rich. So the system.
So, yeah, they did a great study in Germany, for example, and they looked at the lowest percentile. They divided into 10 different groups, 10% of the population. And the lowest economic group were the ones that pay the highest amount of interest. So because of interest, there's this concentration of wealth that happens. I could come in, with my magic wand tomorrow and have a redistribution of wealth. However, it will, an equitable distribution of wealth, it's not going to make any good. If you have interest, it concentrates the wealth again and again up to the 1%. And I'm not saying nefarious things have not happened in Wall Street. I'm not saying that there hasn't been skullduggery and things that are pretty dreadful. But the wealthy cannot help it. The wealthy cannot help it. As a result of investments and because of positive interest rate, it is going to cause the concentration of wealth. And we all know the results of concentration of wealth, the chasm that is building up. So, having money that doesn't have interest will address that problem. I hope I've answered your question. Back to you, Alison. Ellen?
What sort of system would you envision that would allow for long-term growth as opposed to, the long vision as opposed to the short?
The long vision is actually by having a negative interest rate. We discount the future because of positive interest rate, negative interest rate flips it around. So you can actually have a company like Bechtel or long-term projects that look at a 100-year horizon. One of the things I just want to say, and I'll get back to Alison's question here, is when I was writing this book called Rethinking Money, I was talking to my editor and he asked me to describe the competitive society, which I tried to do. And I think some of us are almost unaware of how competitive our society is. And then he said, oh yeah, and then describe a society where it's cooperative. And I said, it doesn't exist. So I had to pluck out of the ethers 4 or 5 different scenarios of societies that are operational with a diverse ecology of complementary currencies, and imagine how they would operate. And then if you look at the book, you can then see how money can imbue society with the values that we need. So one of the things that complementary currencies, if designed well and have a negative interest rate, is that the future is not discounted. It is actually more financially rewarding to plan long term. And I'm not talking 10 years, I'm talking 100 years. And that's what these people did with the great cathedrals and with the pyramids. I don't think they were cognizant of what they were doing, but they were able to do public work that could last for many, many generations.
What's the negative interest rate?
And it's negative interest. It's called demurrage, which is the time stamping of your money. So your money will rust if you don't spend it. Yeah. So, Raza. Sorry, am I calling you the wrong name?
Roya.
Roya. I'm so sorry. I do apologize.
I turned back because it was
Sorry.
No, I have a really, I'm confused now because IMF, International Monetary Fund, is trying to eat up all the countries and bring them into global banking. And there are a few countries have refused, and I think Iran is one of them. But you mentioned about Brazil, and they talked about they have 2 different currencies. And which currency is refusing to be part of IMF, or is that the whole country?
I think there's 2 different things. Complementary currencies do not impinge on the IMF or the World Bank. They're dealing with national currencies and with governments. So, it really doesn't matter. The European Central Bank has ruled that complementary currencies are not a threat because they're so marginal. And we saw in the case of the Banco Palmas in Brazil, the government are actually behind. And local governments that we've seen in Bristol, for example, are really behind complementary currencies. So it's not part of the equation.
So their central bank is also refusing to be part of IMF, or is that?
No. The conventional currency continues as normal. Part of the World Bank, the IMF, the Central Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, and all this. That's their particular system. What we have is a multiplicity over here of complementary currencies going about their business. You can, we and I can agree to trade Coke bottle tops if we want to, in payment of something. That's our business. So it has nothing to do with the IMF or whatever else whatsoever. Yes?
Well, I'm just curious, it all sounds so good.
Yeah.
That this must potentially be a threat to predatory capitalism. If something really works in a community, and, what would be the threat? Or would there be a threat?
There is no threat, and I think we've got to get out of this dialectic of, oh my God, capitalism, oh my God, whatever. It is, I think when people see it working, and I think those that might have a nefarious feeling or, might think in the old modality, can see that if people are able to get on with their lives, be able to live decent lives, it's a benefit to everybody. There's no threat in it. We're not going to threaten the legal system, because that's going to go on. But that doesn't stop us having our other forms of agreements and getting on with our lives too. Will there be a pushback? There could well be with banks. I've never known a monopoly to feel good about being threatened. So we may see, I think there'll be an awful lot of false things said about complementary currencies. If they don't work, they'll take the example of Bitcoin, for example, that will go down in flames because it doesn't have what I see are the essential 7 points of any good complementary currency, which is being hyper-democratic, being transparent, and that's none of that stuff. It's a tool of speculation. They'll use that as an example. All these things are terrible. Something will be drawn up. But, these things pass, and, we all know how to use social media. We know how to galvanize support and get the word out there. But, everybody, money is the last great taboo in our society. We've dealt with sex in the 60s, thank God. We've dealt with death and dying, with the terrible AIDS epidemic, with the terrible wars we've been through. We've gotten these subjects into a commonplace where we can talk about them. The last great taboo is money. We don't know how to talk about it. It's considered that mysterious thing over there. And I say we've got to get this into commonplace conversation so we can really understand what money is, what it's doing to our society, and be able to find a way to language it to our friends, to our colleagues, and make this no longer a taboo subject. Alison.
So we need as many different practical applications of this as we can possibly get. And you said at the beginning, one of the ways to move this forward is to dig into our areas of expertise and see how this relates, so you know where I'm going with this.
Yes.
I've been talking with the public bank people too. I think there's a great opportunity to create the Boulder Energy Future Dollars. We're about to have $10 to $20 million that we can invest in our own utility. Yeah, we can go pay the utility, or we can actually invest in something long-term. We'll have to deal with the rest element of it, or maybe that's just a piece of it. For example, and this is my specific question to you, the chamber is very reticent because of the outside chamber's threat to our local chamber. Stay away from that, it's going to mess up our economy, blah, 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 blah. I see, and the other element of the Boulder community around the whole municipalization for a clean energy future project is that people are very concerned if something does go wrong, that people in need, elders, are not impacted. So what about a Chamber Boulder Energy Future complementary managed dollar system, which will give the Chamber the kudos, which will, and so instead of having us taxed off of our utility bill to Excel every month an extra 7.5% to 9.5%, how about our chamber does something useful? I mean, excuse me, we have a good chamber in Boulder. And they manage the complementary currency with its rest factor for low-income people, for handicapped people. And so I want to give that piece of the project to you.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I want you to think about it between now and 2 o'clock and see who we go hit up.
Okay. So basically, we would open up a conversation into Boulder or whatever community you belong to and see what the needs are.
That's right.
Design a currency to place the onion sort of thing.
Clean energy future dollars.
Yeah, exactly. But there's all kinds of really sexy things that can be done. So,
All
but
kinds.
yeah, it's
Is
delicious.
this stuff in your book?
Yes, a lot of this stuff is in my book. I think I actually have a slide. No. Yes, there I do.
Is it being sold here?
Unfortunately not, but you can get it on Amazon, and what we'd love you to do is actually support your local bookstore. But a lot of them is a lot of stories, more stories than I could even go through now. And I think by hearing stories of what ordinary people are doing extraordinary things in their own community, you can see an application for your own needs and your own community. Susan.
2 things. First, I've been thinking about interest as playing a game of musical chairs, where it ends with someone, everybody loses. And I wonder if, since I can't remember the details of the complementary currency in Africa, if Ellen, who has written about it, could just tell us that quick story.
Oh yeah, there's a group in Africa, anyway, built something, I don't remember, anyway, they were all thrown in jail because.
Oh, this is M-Pesa.
Oh, right, yeah, so it's a small town in Africa near Mombasa.
Yeah, I know.
Where they issued a currency to all these little local businesses, which was like basically women, you know, that were making something or selling tomatoes or something like that. So they all got little pieces of this, I think it was 500 of these. It came out to like $5 each that they all got in this currency, and then a certain percentage was put aside for public works. In other words, they would pay people to clean up garbage or do things that the community needed. And immediately, the GDP of this little town increased by 20%. So all these products got sold that obviously there was a market for, there just wasn't any money for. So in fact, it didn't compete with the national currency at all, but because, I don't know, there was some appearance of collaborating with some terrorists or something, I don't know, so they wound up in jail. And it was yeah. But in fact, it worked very well, and they want to transfer it to the telephone system where they can use this currency, transfer this sort of currency in different towns in Africa where they don't have banks at all, so they really don't have.
Yeah, what is really interesting is they want almost 1.5 billion people. Thank you for coming. 1.5 billion people in the world do not have access to banking. It's like 40 million here in the United States. Because they're not considered desirable, blah, 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 blah. And I think with mobile telephony now, we're going to have the capability of having digital purses on our wallets, on our phones, so we can give banking services, and obviously you've heard what Occupy are doing. So this is all a very, very exciting time because of the availability of all this good stuff. I will take one last question. This lady here.
Mine isn't a question, it's just a comment.
Please.
I was reminded of it when you were talking about the patriarchal and monarchical societies.
Louder,
There's a
please.
saying many years ago, trust in God, she will provide.
That's the exact. I think one last one, this lady in green.
I was just wondering whether you heard about the complementary currency at the Down North Spiritual Community in Italy. Are you familiar with them?
Yes.
Well, when I saw the name of Bernard Leitner on your book, I thought that you might have. But I just had an insight about it because, you know, it's a community of about 900,000 people, but it probably gets that many visitors like every 6 months. When we go there, we change our euros into their complementary currency, which gives the community an infusion of the other kind of money to be able to do the projects that they need to do outside.
Very good. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming.